Good evening and welcome to St. Peter's in Hove. I'm Father Alexander and welcome to our 204th step in our walking tour through the Bible, and we're in the book of Proverbs. Chapter 2 is what I'm going to look at today. I'm finding Proverbs rather more interesting than I thought I would, largely perhaps because it's a book I've neglected in the past. I've never actually sat down before now and studied or read the book of Proverbs. It should be read rather than studied, because this is a very cursory walking tour, don't forget. Now, in the second chapter, the person who's speaking, who's essentially giving an exhortation to follow the path of wisdom, contrasts the two paths, the path of wisdom, which leads to God, and the path of unwisdom, which leads to death. And so the reader is confronted with a bifurcation on the way. Which path are you going to take? Are you going to take the path of wisdom, or are you going to take the path that leads to death? Now, that sounds like a silly question. Who's going to take the path that leads to death? But in fact, many do take the path that leads to death, and we'll see why. So what is the path? What does the path of wisdom lead to? It leads to God, but it leads to a certain type of behavior, which is mentioned in verses 9 and 10. He says, if you take the path to wisdom, if you do all the things that you should do and so on, then you will understand uprightness, equity, and fair dealing. In other words, then you'll understand the moral life. Uprightness, equity, and fair dealing, they really seem to be all the same thing. Honesty, justice, treating people justly, doing the right thing. It's all a bit content-free, it's all a bit vague, but we know what those things mean. And then he calls that something more, the paths that lead to happiness. Now, quite often we, living as we do in this century of ours, think that virtue is unattractive. Because the devil has all the best tunes, and because those who go off and do wicked things are generally, we get the horrible impression, having more fun. You've heard of FOMO, fear of missing out. So if we stay on the narrow path, the straight path that leads to God, the path of wisdom, will we not be missing out? Will we not be having fun with all the people we could be, all the wicked people? Well, the writer of the Proverbs wants us to know that uprightness, equity, and fair dealing lead to happiness. These are the things that lead to happiness. In other words, honesty and justice are to be loved for themselves. Quite often you might think that Christians love honesty and justice simply because it's a path to heaven. It gets us to heaven. It'll guarantee our salvation. But even if there were no heaven to win, we still believe, surely, honesty is better than dishonesty, uprightness is better than deceit, and fair dealing is better than crooked dealing. In other words, what the writer wants us to know is that good behavior is innately attractive. Now, I think what we've got to do in our prayer and in our thought, in our daily reflections, is love virtue. Love virtue, look at virtue, long for virtue, appreciate virtue, and put aside all the contrary thoughts that virtue is boring or virtue is innate, is a bit dry and unattractive. Love virtue, as the poet Milton said. Virtue is lovable. St. Ignatius has this meditation in the spiritual exercises of the two flags of the opposing armies, the army of God, the army of the devil. And you look at both flags and you appreciate what the flag of God is and what the flag of the devil is, and you long for God. Prayer is about forming our desires and helping them to grow in the right direction. Now, then he contrasts this, the life of virtue, with a life that is not virtuous. And he talks about those whose speech is deceitful. And keep yourself from the way of evil, from those whose speech is deceitful, those who've left the path of honesty, those who walk the road of darkness. Now, he doesn't, again, it's all rather vague. What exactly are these people up to? Well, he does have one quite strong image of what the unvirtuous life is like, the unwise life is like. And this occurs in verse 16. If to keep you two from the woman who belongs to another, from the stranger with her wheedling words. She has left the partner of her younger days. She has forgotten the covenant of her God. Her house is tilting towards death. Down to the shades go her paths. Of those who go to her, not one returns. They never regain the path of life. Now, is he warning us here against adultery, going off with a woman who is not yours, in other words, the one who belongs to another man's wife? Or is this female who is evoked here, is she some sort of traditional representational figure of the debauched life, the life that leads to death, the unwise life? Could be both. He could be saying, keep away from adultery and adulterous women, because that will destroy your soul if you consort with adulterous women. Or it could be that the life of not seeking wisdom is like committing adultery. I think it's probably both, but I think this woman is probably a symbolic figure. So I don't think we need to get too worried about the fact that the writer of the book of Proverbs dislikes women. Rather, when he sees everything that is wrong, well, I suppose maybe he does dislike women, because when he sees everything that wants to try and sum up what is wrong, he sums it up as a female figure. Now, possibly this is because he finds women attractive, and therefore the deceitful figure is also an attractive figure. He's warning us against the attractions of vice. And therefore, that's what we need to do. We need to take this on board. Vice is superficially attractive, but it doesn't pay off in the long run. Of those who go to her, not one returns. Those who give themselves over to vice, they never come back. They never regain the paths of life. That's pretty grim. He's saying once you fall off the cliff, you never get back onto the cliff top. You're finished forever. In other words, what he's talking about is that old favourite of the Catholic Church, mortal sin. In other words, once you make that choice and go down that path, the choice is irreversible. Now, we don't quite believe that. It's true that if you die in mortal sin, the choice you made when you made your mortal sin is irreversible. But it's also true that while somebody who's committed mortal sin lives, they always have a chance to repent. They can always climb back up to where they were before they fell. So that's interesting, isn't it? Morality is a choice. Our lives are full of choices, but really what he's writing about here is the fundamental choice that we have to follow virtue or to follow vice. We're full of small choices every day, but these small choices impact on our fundamental choice, which should be to follow God. And therefore, our small choices are very important because they can lead us away from the right path. So, morality is serious. And that is one of the lessons we get from the book of Proverbs. There's chapter 2 for you. All the very best. Bye.